Hello, I am Lisa J. Stocks. Sorry, I'm running a few minutes late today, but I have a special guest. On this channel, we talk all things about investing, financial literacy, ETFs, learning how to take control of your money. And today we're going to be having a real conversation with Darius Jamal. And he is another person like me who is passionate about teaching people how to invest and build wealth. Now, we all have access to invest, but access is not enough. We have to have the knowledge in order to do it well and make sure that we are maximizing this opportunity. And so let me bring Darius up. Hello there.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good, guys. This is Darius Jamal. He is a fellow YouTuber. His information will be in the description, and we will be dropping it in the chat throughout today's live stream. And if you haven't already, make sure to give this live a thumbs up. Subscribe to both of the channels if you're not already. And let's get into this. So, Darius, I'm going to start with a few questions so that we can get to know you.
Yeah.
What what was it that, excuse my voice, guys, because I have a cold. If I have to take a break to drink and stuff like that, please be patient. But I just wanted to just kind of keep to my regular schedule because we've been wanting to do this for some time now. Okay, so first thing, what was the thing that sparked your interest in wanting to bring this knowledge, have your YouTube channel, and just, show us how to build a portfolio, show us all of these different aspects of the great ETFs that you primarily show us over on your channel?
Yep. So I was really inspired by the fact that there aren't many. There's a lot of people who aren't aware of investing. There's a lot of people who have jobs. They have 401ks offered. They're not taking advantage of that. There's a lot of people who, especially now, side hustles becoming almost normalized. uh, People still overlook the power of investing, and they think it's just some complicated thing to do that only people who like work in finance or have degrees in finance can be successful at.
Hmm.
And like what inspired me is that I didn't grow up learning about investing. I learned after I finished school, and the people around me didn't know about investing. So it was just something that I realized after having a job and learning like what a 401k was. Like, wait a second, like this is something that has a lot of power. And of course, I looked online the first time I found about 401ks, and I was researching because my friends and family weren't into investing, so I didn't really have any uh, motivation or like people who mentioned it to me to kind of put the seeds to plant in the seeds about investing. So I think for me, like the biggest thing was me learning how to invest and then really trying to spread the word on investing because
Okay.
it's, it's something so simple that everybody can do it, but many people are just not doing it because they're just not aware.
All right. You said two things. It's powerful and it's so simple. So it might not be simple to everyone, but I want us to all get to that point where we're talking like what you just said there, because this really is a powerful tool that we need to be maximizing in a different way. So overall, what would you say is the mission of your channel?
For me, just to teach people about ETFs, like a wide variety of ETFs, so broad market, dividend investing, more of the income side, with covered call ETFs. And then, I don't have videos yet, but at some point I'd like to add more market news. So even if it's like a bi-weekly thing that I do, at some point I want to start, to implement that. But for now, strictly, ETFs, all type of ETFs.
Yeah, I'm waiting for you to incorporate some individual stocks too. Those, your chosen blue chip stocks, whatever they may be, because I don't know what they are because you do primarily focus on those ETFs. So guys, I'm going to take a quick station break again. Sorry for the late start, but I am Lisa J. Stocks. I'm here today with my special guest, Darius Jamal, talking all things finance. Make sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. And thank you guys for tuning in. We are going to be just focused on our interview today, but a little bit later on, I will take a break to take a look through the chat for questions. So please clearly mark your questions in case we have time to touch on them. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about what you were saying, like gig work is the norm. Even working two full-time jobs nowadays is the norm. What do you think? Why do you think that many people have fallen into that, where they're just earning enough to survive, or they're creating that lifestyle where, there's nothing left to prioritize putting aside for investing as well as saving?
Yeah, and I don't want to play down the seriousness of it and just say, like, oh, people should just find get a better job, because that's not always, that's an option, but that's not always the opportunity is not always there for people right away. I think the biggest thing to highlight is that inflation is real. The cost of goods and services has gone up, rent has gone up, and this is putting a lot of pressure on a lot of people. So people, as opposed to doing side gigs to have extra money for discretionary spending or whatever, whatever the case may be, people are now using that to help supplement their lifestyle. Now, whether that's for necessary things or not, that's a case by case thing. But I think now with just how expensive things have gotten, it's just kind of made it harder for the everyday person. With rent being the primary concern, because that's obviously the largest portion of people's expenses overall. Um, and I think, like I said, side jobs now have it's kind of been normalized to just have the side job. In reality, it's just people getting two jobs. um, I'm not really a big fan of that. For me,
No,
I like
no.
to, yeah.
Any tips or insights, things that have crossed your mind on how to cut back and find ways to divert some of that money to investing and saving?
I think the biggest thing is uh, spending on discretionary spending. So spending on things. I don't want to necessarily say subscriptions, because a Netflix subscription may not be the thing to make or break
Mhm.
somebody, but going out to bars and going out eating out, stuff like that, those are things that could play a big role in, and somebody
Yes.
being able to cut costs. I think the most important thing is cutting costs from your everyday spend as much as you can, and then from there, use that to invest. But I think the best option is trying to invest in a way to create a little bit more additional income for yourself, and then before you get into just investing right away. I think investing a few dollars here and there is good, but I don't think it should be the ultimate priority if you're in a place where you're just barely scraping by. I think just having good practices of splitting up your spending, like these are the things I have: my rent, my food. These are things that I don't need. I cook at home. Now, whatever's left, I'm going to use this for investing, and then maybe this part is going to be something to improve uh, my standing within my job, or maybe certain goals I have to improve in school or work or whatever skill set to kind of help increase the income. Because the thing is about investing is of course it's good to get in the practice. So that's why even any small amount is still good to get in the habit of doing that. But I
Mhm.
think the most important thing is just learning to invest, whether it's small or not, and then as you increase your income, also learn to make a bigger contributions to that income. I mean, to your investments, because at the same time, when people make more money, they also tend to spend more money. So I think it's really important to get your personal finances in check first, try and improve your standing, and then from there, try and amplify your investments.
Yes, I agree with what you're saying, and I'm always trying to, like, I always use my youngest daughter as my example. That I'm trying to just try to tell her, like, when you get out there in the world, don't create a situation where all of the money is going to rent and car payment and car insurance. And then there's nothing left over for saving and investing. You have to leave a buffer there because, like we've seen in the last couple of years, price of groceries, the price of insurance, the price of everything has increased so much. We have to be ready for that, and always create a budget that is always going to entail having an amount for saving and investing, and so that that's not the first thing that always drops off and is eliminated. So um I want to just hear about your investing story. You already kind of touched on that 401k, and kind of dawned on you like this is really a powerful thing. I wound up starting to work full time when I was 19 years old. So I fell into working full time and getting offered that 401k. So I got started early. When did you get started with investing? And how long before you got started investing? If you were like me, you were kind of just doing it at first and not knowing what you were invested into exactly, what the performance was. What is kind of your journey into getting started investing?
Yeah, so my investing journey, like I mentioned, it started after school. So after I graduated college and I got my first job, um, I had a 401k, and I did like my at that time, around that time when I graduated, I did see that I had 401k, and at the time my dad had mentioned to me like, like, oh, if you have an investing plan, like make sure you look to see if your job has an investing plan. I'm like all right, like whatever that means. So I looked into my job. I saw that they had 401k match. Of course, I had to look and see what that was. And then I saw the funds, which I really didn't know about at that time. I ended up investing straight into a target date fund, which I believe is usually like the standard, anyways, unless you select otherwise. So right off the bat, like that's kind of what I was invested in, and it kind of led me to look into it more into ETFs. But there's a side piece to that because before that happened, I was really kind of into real estate investing. So, but I wasn't doing real estate. I had a friend that showed me the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. So it's kind of cliche, you always hear it, right? But that kind of led me on the path of understanding the power of the dollar and the power of saving and all those aspects of personal finance and growth and making your dollars work for you. I didn't really know about that. So my friend at the time showed me that book, and I was it's kind of hyping up real estate investing. I'm like all right, I'll just check it out. So I read the book, and then that kind of woke me up when it came to creating value for myself beyond my job. So then I was really looking into like how to get into real estate investing, and that kind of led me down the rabbit hole of watching a lot of videos. Um, at that time, I was like binging Bigger Pockets. I don't know if you know Bigger Pockets, but Bigger Pockets podcast at the time was
Yeah.
really big, and I was binge watching their content. I was reading on the forums and stuff like that. So that was kind of the first investing avenue that I didn't get involved in yet, but just from a knowledge standpoint of researching, it led me down that path, the book. And then from there, it led, when I learned about compounding and stuff, I also saw investing, learned about investing. So this was happening at the same time I started my job. So, I was looking into ETFs, but then I was also learning about real estate investing and just compounding uh, and just the dollar working for you. And that kind of led me to look more into like, okay, like this incorporates like real estate investing, having a business, and then those were the aspects that I learned from the book, the fundamentals, and I started
Okay.
looking to those different things. So I would say that book and the 401k really led me to really drive into looking like, okay, investing's real. Like, um, it can do a lot with a little, and you don't need to be rich to get started, and you don't need to be rich. You don't need to start rich or start in a good position just to end up in a position of wealth or to be able to have enough money to have time freedom essentially. So that's those I would say are the two big things that led me into really getting into investing.
Okay. So I've gotten a couple of need to take a quick station break because I've gotten a few comments, including from Sledge, that your volume is a little bit low. Is there anything that you think you can do to
Oh yeah,
improve
it,
your sound, be a little closer to the mic or anything?
oh probably yeah, yeah. Let me know because I'm trying
Okay.
this mic out for the first time, so
Okay.
I probably need to put it closer. If that's better, let
All
me know.
right. All right. Sledge, if you could give us another comment, if there's any improvement to the sounds, I would appreciate it. Okay, so you mentioned a few things there. So now, right now, do you have rental properties? Are you still, what is your involvement in real estate now that your friend, or that was your first introduction, even before thinking about investing? Are you still involved with real estate or not so much?
Yeah, well, I have one property, uh, basically near DC,
Okay,
but that wasn't at the time. At that time, I didn't have I didn't have any money at that time, but it was just I was just driven so much by learning because for me it was just so unreal. So it really drove me to learn more about real estate investing. But I didn't actually have a property at that time.
okay.
Um, yeah,
So now let's go back to that target date fund because I've done a
yeah,
little bit of research. I don't know for sure, like I don't know the statistics on it, but a high percentage of people when they start working, they get, involved with their 401k, they're going to be defaulted into that target date fund. And it wasn't until I, started to increase my financial literacy and had the mindset that I have that I even called the company that I was working with at this particular time was use Fidelity for our retirement account. And when I called Fidelity, I asked all of the available options through my company's 401k. And FXAIX was one of them, which is an investment that gives exposure to the S&P 500. So at first, I'm assuming, like me, you were defaulted into that target date fund that correspond with your date. Do you have any stories or any insights on what you've done at companies when you were defaulted into it? Did you change the date of the target date funds, which is something that I've been mentioning and I've shared throughout my videos of using a further out date, even 20 years, as a way of getting a higher exposure to stocks and less into bonds and those conservative things. I try to find, if I am limited to a target date fund, I'm trying to find one that is like 92% plus into stocks, or more things that are moving a bit quicker, not so conservative, because when they correspond to your age, to your retirement date, I find that they shift to be conservative too quickly. That's been my experience. So I've done that, as well as shifting completely into um, an investment account like an FXAIX or another growth fund that was available to me through my employer's plan, and shifting completely out of the target date fund. So those have been my experiences. Do you have any that you did in order to combat the things that we are defaulted into in order to maximize your 401k potential and growth?
yeah. Well, I so of course since I started with the target date fund, when I was learning about ETFs, the three fund portfolio is one of the first things that came about that I came across. Um, the Bogleheads three fund portfolio, and of course that incorporates bonds, but obviously it still plays into the whole target date fund. As you get older, then there's more placement into bonds, and then having exposure to international and stuff like that. So for me, the target date fund was 100% stocks, from the get go. Um, and then once I learned more about ETFs, I kind of saw that, well, it's kind of set up the same way, but then I saw target date funds change without it change on their own, just like you mentioned, based on the date of the fund, right? The retirement date. So I took my I kept the target date fund there, and later I just swapped it over because I looked into the fund to see what it was exposed to, and I'm like, well, I'm just gonna do like the three fund portfolio strategy and not have bonds because I don't need it yet, and have U.S. and then a small amount of international exposure. So I just ended up swapping over my portfolio setup to having that.
So
I
was this after you were no longer working with this employer, or did you go and do a Roth IRA on your own?
No, it was at the same employer. Got, I
Oh,
mean,
okay. They
yeah,
gave you that
got,
flexibility that you could choose the type of funds that you wanted.
yeah, exactly. So you had, yeah, you have the choice. There's not a huge selection, but you have the choice between the target date and then probably maybe 10 to 12 other different type of funds spread
Okay.
across different
Okay.
asset classes as well. Um,
Okay. Okay, it seems like you did something similar to what I did, like at one point just completely shifting out of the target date fund and over into an S&P. So you were able to
yeah,
find a mix of three different funds that you felt were more in line with your long-term strategy and goals.
yeah,
Okay.
and I think for most people, again, obviously, if you, it's better to be invested than not at all. So for someone who just wants to throw away and not look at it, it's always better than nothing, right? Um,
Yes.
but I think it's good to at least have some foundational, like basic knowledge on the concepts around ETFs, just so you have a little bit more control of, like you said, your exposure to bonds or whatnot.
Mhm.
Because it doesn't mean that you really have to be that involved. It's just you just have to be aware of like, all right, this is what I have exposure to, and then maybe you want to have a little more exposure to U.S. stocks for longer. You don't want to have bonds until later. Maybe you want to have be a little bit more yeah, but maybe you want to be more aggressive for longer because you want to be invested in growth as well. But you don't have that flexibility with the target date funds. So I
Yes.
think it's good just to have the general knowledge about ETFs, just like broad market, international, bonds, growth, dividends, and like I feel like once you know just at least the those different type of ETFs, you can adjust yourself well and have a better feel for the market. And I think you can better align your investing portfolio to your specific needs, and wants. So
Okay. All right, so I'm gonna share a little joke that I take it as a joke. Some people they usually are they want to give me a shout out or something like that, and they're like, if you want to learn about stocks and bonds, check out Lisa's channel because I guess those words just go together, and I'm always like, oh no 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 no, you won't be hearing anything about any bonds over here. I've had people share some sad stories with me of, Lisa, should I have some money in BND and these different bond funds? And I'm like, absolutely not. You are too young and vibrant to have any money in there. Your high yield savings account would have earned you more. I see no necessity for you to have your money sitting in that right now. That's been my feeling about bonds for the last
yeah,
few years. It was just a couple of years ago, I was getting, 5 at least 5.1%, 5.0 on my high yield savings account. So there was absolutely no reason to be in a bond fund that, was at 1 or 2%. So okay, so you already were touching on growth and bonds and this and that. I want to share a comment that I got recently because I invest into both ETFs and individual stocks. For example, I have SMH in my portfolio as well as I have some exposure. I built up a position into NVIDIA and Taiwan Semi and AMD. All right. After those three, that's what I had a position in those three funds, not funds, those three stocks before I started investing into SMH. And at that point, I felt like, okay, I don't want to have to go on to the next tech thing that I want to build into. Maybe it's time for me to lean on a fund for exposure. Same kind of situation when it comes to growth. I have, uh, you know, Google and Microsoft. I have some of those Mag 7 investments as well as the S&P. So what I look at it as is having stability and then additional growth by having direct exposure into those particular companies that I see the value and the long term potential of. Do you go about it in the same way? What do you think about my thought process and people making comments sometimes to me like, Lisa, that's not diversification. You already have the S&P, as though I don't then need additional Nvidia and Google and Tesla and all of those things.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that because I'm not I'm not a good example of that. Just because I know for me, I'm a much more aggressive investor.
Okay.
Um, I preach ETFs because I know most people do not want to be involved in the market. Most people don't want to keep up with what's going on in the market
Okay.
or keep up what's going on with specific stocks and the earnings calls and what's going on in the sectors within and the businesses and the industries. So for me, I think you can get, I don't want to say just as good of a performance, but with all the different type of ETFs there are now, there's so much, you can have a portfolio that has so much growth potential as opposed to, in the past, probably, days before I was investing or before my time, probably my parents' time. And now the amount of ETF, well, there's what more ETFs now than stocks. So the fact that there's so much opportunity, for growth potential with more aggressive funds beyond, just having the S&P 500 that might be currently a little bit more growth leaning or tech max 7 leaning. I think you can still have a very aggressive portfolio just through ETFs. Now,
Okay.
I say that being I'm someone who actually has more stocks, more in stocks than my ETFs. Um, I do own Tesla. Tesla is one of my largest holdings, makes a pretty big portion of my portfolio, but I've been investing in Tesla for a long time. So
Hmm.
the amount of money that I've invested in the stocks that I've chosen is much less than what I've invested, for example, in the S&P 500 or like SCHG or QQQ, um, just because they've grown so much. But like you, Tesla is a big portion of my portfolio. I have Palantir, I have Amazon, I have Apple. I'm
Hmm.
I'm very much so tech leaning, like like extremely
Yeah, me
tilted in
too.
wealth. Um,
Me too.
but again, I have a long investing timeline, so I'm willing to take a little bit more risk. And I'm very particular about certain names that I buy into, like the Palantirs. Like, yes, there's a lot priced in Palantir, but I bought Palantir when it was single digits, 7, 8, 9, 10. But I wasn't buying, Palantir when it was breaking 200, stuff like that. So I'm pretty strategic when I buy my stocks. I think names like Google, Meta, Microsoft, it's hard to go wrong with those as well. But I think now, since stocks have become more, investing has become more popular. So a lot of the high beta names that run up, it's very easy to get people attracted to them and make bad investment decisions. So that's why I'm sometimes kind of particular about telling people about investing into stocks, because I think you should have a little bit of uh, inspiration or like motivation, determination to learn more
To do
about
the
the
research. Yeah.
businesses and, yeah, do the due diligence to read about these companies and know what's going on rather than see like, oh, it went up 80% this year. Like, I got to get in now because I want to be there for the next 80%. So,
Hmm. Okay. So I just saw a comment yesterday, and the person said, like the investments that you're talking about in this video, like we've been mentioning here, those blue chip names, those Mag 7 companies, those are too expensive for many people. Why aren't you, share some SoFi and some this and that? And do you really drive uh, this through your sharing through your channel of making sure to let people know that whether it's a fund or individual stocks that you can buy fractional shares? If that's not available through your broker, please find a broker that that is available to through so that you can focus on the quality of the company and not the price and be over here chasing penny stocks. Can you share a little bit of
Yeah.
insight on that?
Yeah. I actually responded to comments very recently about that, especially around VU, which is pretty surprising, right? One of the most popular funds, S&P 500 funds and funds in general. Um, about like, oh, VU is expensive. Like, I don't like VU. VU is trash because it's expensive. I invest in, IVV or like, and it's kind of like, well, two, three, all these different funds that track the same index, they're they're tracking the same index. So really the only variation there is the tracking error, which for those popular ones is not really an issue. And then the expense ratios, which a lot of them it's so small it's essentially irrelevant. 0.01 is not going to be a game changer. Um,
Mhm.
so
Well,
I just
S&P, that's an easy one. You can just go with
yeah.
SPYM and you're all set if you don't want to do VOO. Um,
Yeah, and it's like you mentioned, like $50 into VU and $50 into SPY-M is it's $50 invested in the S&P 500. Like one isn't better than the other, or like it's not bad because it's more. It's really just important. What matters is how much you're putting in there. Right.
mhm, mhm. Really, I just wanted to just talk about and make sure to bring up that it does you can do it $10 at a time, $50 at a time. You don't have to jump in and it has to be full share, whatever that may be. Meta, Microsoft, sometimes some of these stocks, they haven't had a split. They may be $500. They might not be $100. $100 might be a little bit even out of certain people's budget for them to, go and buy a full share. But how do you go about building up your positions? Is it usually in fractional shares or do you usually uh, work by full shares?
Yeah. Well, first, I think it's psychological, right?
Mhm.
Like people want to buy a share. Like I think even if you tell people about fractional shares, like I think it's a psychological thing where it's like they want to own a whole share, even though in reality it doesn't change much, right? Um, for me, when I purchase ETFs, I'm just gonna purchase based on dollar amount. So the dollar
Okay.
amount I put in is what I'm investing. It doesn't matter how many shares or how many half shares it is. That's the amount that's being invested. When it comes to stocks, I'm a bit more selective. Um, I tend to buy in certain times. I'm not dollar cost averaging into any stocks. That's just my, you know, investing strategy. Um,
Mhm.
I'll typically try and buy on down days, but I'm not sitting there waiting, for the perfect market opportunity. But I'll focus on the ETFs, and then I'll tend to put larger amounts, during, for specific stocks, rather
Okay.
than ETFs. It's just always money is going to be flowing to ETFs.
So do you do limit orders or do you just physically like set up alerts and watch the charts yourself?
No, I do orders. So, for example, I mean, probably the last thing I bought, which probably wasn't good timing, right? With everything that's going on now. But I did buy I've been buying SoFi, for example, at post earnings. I did buy a little bit more meta because it didn't make any sense, things like that.
Mhm.
Aside from macro events, if there's huge macro events, like for example last year when we had the whole tariff scare, like that was an opportunity where I was essentially buying more Microsoft, more Meta. um, I don't Tesla and stuff, I don't touch that because for me it's still pretty hot price wise. um, so I would usually wait until those opportunities to buy into individual stocks. Like I said, for me it's just the ETFs I focus on, and I try to be a lot more strategic with the individual.
Yeah, I think I do the same, and I definitely do a mix of staying consistent with my investing. Right now, I'm working on FSPGX, SPMO, SMH, but then I also incorporate buying the dip on my individual companies that I want additional exposure to. All right, all right. So I wanted to get into some of your favorite funds, but I'm so glad that I got some insight as to individual stocks that you're holding. SoFi is a really volatile one, just like Tesla. So it's
Yeah,
kind of
I've been through it.
surprising that you seem like you've built up your knowledge. You know how to navigate them. But I was looking at some detail around SoFi recently, and just seeing SoFi went from $4 to $24. It's one that really has people that weren't ready for that, and in that everyone's investing journey and starting point is different. So it's one that really had people shaken. On their positions when it comes to that one. I don't hold
Yeah,
any SoFi in my portfolio.
yeah, to be honest, after being in Tesla so long, I'm almost numb to the
Yeah.
I'm almost numb to the swings. For me now, I'm aware of it, but it's just I
Yes.
I don't think there's anything that I've held that's really moved that much throughout the years. Obviously
Yeah.
my conviction hasn't changed, but
Mhm. Yeah, there's some things that kind of were, like Google. I mean, I was holding it. I had a little bit of growth, but now it's shot up like crazy. Are you holding any Google stock in your portfolio?
no, I don't.
No,
I
you don't?
for for Mag 7 names, I have Microsoft is a pretty big portion. Meta's my well, Tesla's the largest. Meta would be after Microsoft. Apple is a small amount, but I don't buy Apple. I bought around COVID time,
Yeah.
COVID dip time, and Amazon 2020, 2022 I bought into, and then I really put more into Tesla, Meta, Microsoft, and I would say too, when it comes to like these past few years, the retail investor is a lot more invested in the stock market, which kind of plays more into momentum. And this goes for ETFs as well. Not saying that the retail investor can shift right away because institutional investors play a big role and algos can play a big role based on what's going on in the macro environment. But I think times like when you have the SaaS apocalypse or you have times where there may be periods of the market where there could be an article that just goes viral that may have no substance to it
Mhm.
that could create noise in the market and scare people you know out of the investment and jump ship to something else when the underlying uh, foundation of the business, the fundamentals of the business haven't changed. And I think it's important to realize that, especially with now going into the this transition to this AI driven era, and names like you mentioned like Meta and Microsoft, and the importance of doing your due diligence is that yes, you know reading about analysts and what analysts are posting and what their price targets, that's great to get perspective, but really doing your own due diligence and seeing what's going on with the company and the business around it and the other businesses is right as strong as much important. Because for example, a lot of times analysts will price targets can change, like there could be a great earnings or big news or acquisition or a big merger and or a huge contract that just got picked up, and then now analysts jumping over, throwing up crazy price targets, and it's like, well, wait a second, like where was all this 6 months ago? Where was all this a year ago? So and then sometimes analysts can be really short-sighted, just focused on like this is what's going on in this quarter, and you're not invested as an investor, at least if you're a long-term investor, based on what's going to happen the next quarter. What's important is what are the main catalysts for that company? What are they trying to accomplish for that year? The next 2 years, the next 5 years, and and how the business metrics are, as they built up to that time. The last year, 2 years until now, and then what is it looking like going forward?
I hear what
And
you're saying.
yeah,
And it makes me
and
think about your position that you said in Microsoft. They, thinking about the amount of contracts that they have booked out years out ahead, and the growth that the the revenue that's already locked in years ahead of time. That you're saying that we need to have that long term mindset and be forward thinking about our investments, especially if you want to be able to be a buy and hold investor, which I think both of us are. How often do you cut things from your portfolio, or uh, people often ask me, like, Lisa, like, when are you going to take profit on such and such? And I'm like, I don't really take profit. I just, if anything's, every once in a while I do rebalance and have to, and I do make the choice to cut something. Usually when I cut something from my portfolio, I move it right back into something else that I see the fundamentals in. How about your experience with making changes and potentially taking profit on any investments?
I don't. When I really think about it, for individual stocks outside of Tesla, I haven't sold off any, and it's just because, um, like at some point, I'll make a video about my portfolio, but I'll go
Mhm.
ahead and say it here. Tesla is probably 40-ish% or so of my portfolio, I want to say. Um, so I've slowly trimmed it. One, I don't really like to mention Tesla often because these days it's so controversial. Like but aside from that, I've slowly been working to trim it off. Um, Probably the last 2 years, just slowly trimming and then putting into other stocks that I have conviction in.
Okay.
But there's nothing else like any of the Mag Seven names. I don't need to sell it to get into something else. If there's something else I want to put a bigger position in, I'll just build up and put a bigger, make a bigger position in something. But
Yeah.
aside from that, yeah, I think if there's a stock I want to invest more in, I could maybe put less into ETFs and then use the money to then funnel to that stock that I want to put more
Yeah.
allocation towards.
Yeah, same here. So we never stopped getting the comments about your mic. Can his mic
Oh
be
yeah,
turned up? So just to let you know, I know we're deep into today's collaboration, but just for the future, there I did mute for a minute and try to listen on my through my phone to see how it
uh-huh.
sounded. It sounded okay to me, but there must be a difference in uh, you know, uh, between my volume and yours, but I'm able to hear you well.
Yeah,
All right. Uh, okay. So another thing that I recently did a video about is respecting small amounts of money. And we kind of touched on this when we were talking about at the beginning of the show about, your rent and all of your expenses. Do you have any insight on, say, you're just getting started out, you have a lower income, having that balance of, the what percentage you're allocating to the different areas? And this is another thing I've been trying to, like, I always use my daughter as an example on is I want her to know how to budget $300, because if she doesn't know how to manage that and how to, allocate that in a reasonable way to hit all of the buckets that I want her to know are important, then when she has 3,000, one day when she's managing 300,000, like, I want her to know how to manage small amounts and take a small amount seriously so that she can then in time, as her knowledge grows from now, that she'll be able to do the same when it comes to larger amounts of money. Have you ever thought about money in that way?
yeah, and I I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, and it's the same. I mean, there's a reason why people who win the lottery end up going broke, right? It's
Yes.
essentially that, just at an extreme level.
Mhm.
If you can't manage $300, imagine you get a somehow get a much better job, getting paid 2, 3 times as much, and now you have an extra 1,500, $2,000. You can't manage 300. You're gonna blow through that 2,000. Like
Okay.
I the same bad habits will translate over when you're making more money. So I
Yes.
think, like you mentioned, if you're able to do it when you have less, as you grow, you're gonna have much more discipline in
Mhm.
maintaining those habits.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you what they are, but do you have a plan on retiring early? Do you have like a fire number set for yourself or anything like that?
Yeah, I think
Not there yet.
yeah, that's a tough one because I think it just depends what I'm doing for work. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily that I'm in a rush to like not do any sort of work.
Okay.
Um, but I think maybe I feel like the five and just like I said, since I have such a long investing time horizon, for me, I feel like at least 5 million. I feel like is a number where 4 to 5 is enough, where it's kind of like you do whatever you want and you're essentially insulated, so to
Mhm.
speak, financially insulated from just about anything.
Okay.
Um, so I would say like if I had to throw a number out, that would be the number.
Okay. So I was reading a story, speaking of the lottery, and a woman that was pretty much somewhat estranged from her family. She won $2 million. Her family had gone on vacation, not invited her because they felt that her, financial situation, and they had some issues, and they didn't even invite her on the vacation. Shortly after she won $2 million, the parents or the family members are seeing changes in her. They're seeing her with another vehicle. They're seeing that she moved. They wind up finding out that she won this money, and she's in her late 20s. And now the family, obviously, they want help. They want her to share the money. You just mentioned $5 million. When I'm reading this article, I'm thinking to myself, she's in her 20s, $2 million. She needs to keep all of that for herself and decide what she wants the rest of her life to look like, not trying to take care of parents and siblings that didn't even invite her on this vacation, and have been somewhat estranged from her. What would you do in your late 20s if you came into $2 million?
Uh, well, I think the benefit is, first of all, assuming you have no, you know, financial knowledge, probably the first thing to do would be figure out what you can do with the money. Like I have this much money. What can I do to grow it, and what can I do to preserve it? Right.
Mhm.
Um, and one aspect, I think that would just be the ultimate first step before you decide, like, all right, I'm gonna quit my job and like this is where I'm gonna live and do this. For me, I think the first thing would be assuming that I stayed in the U.S. I would probably, and that's a tough one.
Okay.
That's a tough one because
Just
I
high
could.
level, hypothetical, because that
You
that
got
was
me dreaming right
definitely that was definitely I have you dreaming.
now.
Listen, I was at in a work meeting. It was a Zoom meeting. And the icebreaker question of the meeting was, if you won $1 million, what would you do? So a couple of people answered before me. I've shared this story before. The question gets to me, and I'm just like, I'm thinking, okay, I got $1 million. I'm talking completely about investing, positioning the money, finding out how much it could generate for me on a monthly basis, thinking about what I already have to add to it. And everyone else that had answered before and after me, all they were talking about was, uh, donating money, going on vacation, buying a car, buying a this and a that. And I was actually thinking like $1 million is not that much. I want to see how much. I was thinking of like I was kind of breaking it down to what could this be on a monthly basis for me? What could this be on a weekly, a bi-weekly basis for me in order to be able to draw from. So I think the way I threw this number out to you, and I think you're thinking kind of like me, like, okay, what could I do to turn this 2 million into, so much more, for the future. But all right, one thing I did want to talk to you about that I don't, we didn't even get really, we were having technical difficulties at the beginning of the show, guys. That's why we got started a little late. But Darius goes through in detail on different ETFs over on his portfolio. So I did want to talk about some of those areas, favorite funds and investing strategies. Which your strategy you've been sharing throughout the show is different than what I was assuming. I thought that your foundational investments, the mix of ETFs, would definitely outweigh those individual stocks, but um, that Tesla position sounds like it's pretty extensive. At one point, I had it was this was unintentional because I was not structured in building my portfolio at the time, but my portfolio was over 50% Apple stock unintentionally.
Yeah.
But I worked to build, out my other individual stocks as well as VOO and other more diversified investments. But
Mhm.
it happens, and it's still, as individual stocks goes, it's the Apple is still one of my largest positions.
Mhm.
Um, but back to funds. Your audience loves them. My audience loves them. My highest viewed video is VOO and FXAIX. That is what I think brings people to my channel according to the analytics. So, what are your favorite funds across different categories? Let's start with like S&P 500.
S&P 500. Of course, I'm going to be biased here, so I'm going to say VU.
Boo. Okay.
um, yeah.
What about a growth ETF?
Growth, SHG, and I go back and forth between S. Well, I don't like to really say QQQM because it's not a growth ETF, but I lump it in there just because the holdings in the fund and how it tends to lean anyways naturally. So for me, SHG, I like it because it's a broad-based growth fund, um, and I like the amount of holdings it has. So it's diverse for me, for a growth fund. And then QQQM, I like to also add that mix in there for my growth portion. I like to have more SHG than QQQM, but I've combined the two together to make the growth portion of my portfolio. So
Okay. So what
ETF
about
wise, I mean,
ECS? Dividend funds. Can you give me two in this category? Because I think that there are really uh, drastic methodologies on how they are structured, say between an SCHD and DGRO, for example. So can you kind of give me two dividend focused investments that you really
yeah,
think are quality?
I think, and I'll just make a comment here. I think dividend ETFs can be pretty controversial sometimes because you know you have funds that like SHD, which are very much so based on the specific strategy, and then you may have funds like FDVV, which leans much more into tech, but it's still a dividend fund.
Hmm.
So a lot of times, sometimes there's that battle of like, well, this fund's not good because of the performance, or this fund's not good because of the dividend's not good enough, or the dividend yield's not good enough. So I think it's pretty interesting with at least posting content and seeing the comments.
Hmm.
That sometimes there's a little bit of controversy there between it, but
Yeah.
and it
Before
only
you give
really.
me, okay.
Huh, go
I
ahead,
was going
go
to say,
ahead.
before you give me your picks, I want to throw this into the mix too. At what stage will you be focused on dividend investments? Is it when you're in the preservation stage? Because I've kind of put a halt on my dividend investments for now.
Yeah, and see, and then that's the thing too, because when people hear dividends, of course, it tends to lean more towards value companies just because those companies tend to pay out higher dividends. But just because a company pays out dividends doesn't mean that it's not a growing company. Like Microsoft, for example, has great dividend growth and it pays a dividend, but that's not what people think when they think about dividends. So that's why there's a bit of nuance there when it comes to dividends. When people hear dividend ETF, they just think conservative, like not growth. So I think when it comes to dividends, like dividend growth and dividend growth funds, like you have the DGROW or you have the FDVV, the VIG, those ones tend to have much more growth potential because they incorporate more a blend of growth stocks, blend, and of course, it'll also have value companies in it as well,
Hmm.
as opposed to more defensive funds like SHD or even VYM, which VYM does have a few growth names in it that are a little bit more defensive. SHD is a lot more defensive, and that fund is focusing more on yield and the dividend growth and its metrics. So I don't think it's a bad thing when it comes to dividends. I think it's just your approach. So you can invest in companies that pay dividends, and they're still high growth companies. You have like I mentioned with Microsoft, or you have like Visa and Mastercard. I mean, there's a good amount of companies that have had great growth that pay dividends. I think
Yeah.
it's just important knowing that. So don't get too fixated on like this is a dividend, so that means like it's not gonna grow.
Okay. So are you able
Yeah.
to give me 2 funds?
Yeah. So for me, I would say I like SHD again for the
You
more
do.
defensive nature
Mhm.
of the fund and me being like super hyper growth focused. I think, I think that's a good fund to balance out for somebody who does want to have dividends and maybe they have a more broad base leaning portfolio. And it's a good way, one of the type of funds they can help balance out more, at least for large caps. And
Okay.
then on the other side, I really like Dgrow. I think
Okay.
it's kind of overlooked. It's a good mix of blend growth and value all
All
together
right. Those are
that
the
gives
exact
people
2 that
stability.
I used as the example of the 2 ends of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
spectrum. Okay. So I must be reading your mind. Okay, so all right, how about momentum? Are you a fan of, SPMO?
All right. Don't let me go on too much of a tangent here, but um, or don't let me rant too much. But
Or is
I
it what are you gonna say? It's been
I
moving
I
too sideways?
I like SPMO, but again earlier when we were talking about kind of people being influenced by hype and stuff,
Mhm.
emotion plays into momentum, like in general, and just that investing factor. So I mean, SPMO, it's a great fund at what it does. You have to understand the strategy. Like it chooses stocks based on the momentum value. It's not necessarily picking like the best stocks. Like there's not certain metrics that is looking to then take stocks that are the best. It's taking stocks based on their last 12 months momentum value, assuming that like, well, something that performed that moved this way in most in the past year, or depending on the fund, the past 6 months or whatever the case may be, presume that in the near term that momentum is going to continue. And I think how we saw so much momentum build up in the last year and a half, 2 years, year and a half, really more so. And you can see in SPMO like how much the how much the fund grew. But if you kind of removed what happened in the last year and a half from SPMO and kind of see how the strategy of that fund worked over different periods of the market, you can really understand what you're buying. So like people are like, oh, SBMO is the best. It has growth, and it's like, well, a couple of years ago, SBMO was heavy in energy. It was very defensive. When inflation was hot, energy stocks and more defensive stocks, that's where the transition happened. But the transition didn't happen long enough for SBMO to really capture it because SBMO is always going to be late. Momentum is always going to lag. So if there's short trends, SBMO is going to pick up on that, and then the trend's going to change, and it's going to lag behind and it's not going to keep up. So SBMO is very much so dependent on where we are in the market cycle. So last year and a half, 2 years being in an expansion is great, but when we get more to a period of contraction or obviously like a recession, it's going to lag. And that's why post 2022, after we had, inflation was super hot, peak inflation in what, June, July, I think that was when inflation peaked. And then transition out from once we transitioned, maybe it was like about a year or so later, and then tech really started to pick up again, especially like the Mag 7. SBMO lagged those first 6 months or so. And then when it had its reconstitution the following year in
Mhm.
23, that's when it started to catch up, with the growth funds. So if you compare it to like a growth fund or a tech fund, you'll see that like those funds picked up. SBMO was still having more defensive stocks in its portfolio, and then it transitioned, and then it had more tech names, and Nvidia happened to be a name that's stayed in it for a long time, so it really got to pick up some of the momentum. And then now you see where we're kind of at an inflection point where the market has cooled off a little bit in those hot names, and you see the holdings that's in it now, like Palantir and stuff like that, and Meta, where again, like it kind of picked up a little bit late. So it's just important to know like
Okay. So it
that's
seems
how
like it. Mhm.
momentum works. And a lot of people at that time, especially the last year, is like, oh, SBMO, SBMO, like it did good. I'm gonna drop VU for SBMO, and it's like you need to make sure you understand like what comes with that. This is not a broad market fund. It should be used as a satellite position so you can add it along with whatever other funds to help balance your portfolio. But just because it's linked to the S&P 500 doesn't make it like the ultimate S&P 500 amplified fund.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that I do have a position in, I think I have about 160 shares. And one thing that I really had to think hard about before deciding if it was going to be the right investment for me, I had to kind of wrap my head around, was it only rebalances twice a year? And I was kind of wanting it to rebalance quarterly. Um, but I guess that they felt that that wouldn't be the way to really have a chance to get on track with the momentum of the companies to be changing that quickly. But when it comes to SCHD as well as SPMO, the rebalancing is coming this month. So we're in for some changes, and we will see what the direction goes for those funds in the next few months after SCHD just kind of warmed up this year. It's going to be really interesting to see what direction it goes in after this next rebalancing. I was watching your video last night on the when you were talking about it, your last
Yeah,
SCHD video.
yeah, I'm pretty
But
excited to see what happens.
we shall see. We shall see. But I know we got started a little bit late. I'm gonna get towards my wrapping up questions, things that I think I want to start to incorporate in every interview that I do. I don't do them very often, but let's get started into some of these uh, final questions, fun questions that I've been asked by other interviewers, and I really enjoyed. So, what is your first money memory?
My first money memory with investing or just in general.
No, just in general. What is your first thing that you can think that you relate to? This costs money. I'm using, I need money to do this. Or
Okay,
even you said buying a game?
buying games, yeah. Like as a kid, because
Okay.
a long time ago, I mean, I grew up doing a lot of like reselling and stuff. So growing up, like in order to get uh toys and certain games and stuff that I wanted to, I would sell like candy or whatever, whatever I could find to sell at school when I got to school so that I could make money and then use it to buy the things I want. Like so I
Okay.
kind of carried that throughout my life. But unfortunately, you know, I spent a lot of money throughout that time period. Obviously if I knew about investing that would have been great. But uh but yeah, that was something like growing up, like if I wanted something, I figure out a way to make it. So if I have to sell stuff or have to do side jobs or side work, then I'm gonna do it so I can buy what it is that I want.
Okay. So where were you getting these did your mom or your family know that you were taking things and reselling them? Were you taking the snacks from home and reselling them for money?
I mean, I'll go to Walmart and stuff and get like the
Okay.
I get my
So
parent. Obviously, in the beginning, it was kind of like, oh, I had some bars and I sell it, and I come back and be like, oh, I made some money. So then I got to the point where I kind of influenced my parents to be like, oh, I want to get the big bundle. So of course, when you get, I got Christmas money and some stuff like that. And then I would use it to buy,
mhm.
not just Christmas money, but whatever I had saved, and I could buy bundles of like candy or whatever. I felt
Okay.
like at some point Pokemon cards and stuff were hot. So like buy candy and stuff and then bring it to school and then resell it. And then I'm like, oh, now I got some more money and now I'm gonna go buy, buy this game or buy whatever.
So you were a little entrepreneur trying to do extra chores, just get your money together so you can buy games. Okay. It's a nice money memory. How about what is one money mistake that you made and now you learned from?
Um, Growing up, exactly the same thing I said. So making money and then spending it on clothes and stupid stuff.
On credit card?
On clothes and just
No,
doing
no, no.
stuff
Were
like
you
that.
using credit cards or were you
Oh,
actually?
no, no, no.
No.
I was, for my age, I was doing well, but again, I was just spending money on clothes and shoes and just dumb stuff. Because again, I didn't have the mindset. So that was something I realized later on. Like wow, I've done a good job at trying to figure out ways to make money, but I also do a good job at spending it. So
Okay. So on the other end of that, what's a financial move that you're proud of?
um, getting started investing, I think once you do it the first time and once you start putting some money in and then you start to see it grow, that's kind of when the reality sets in, right? Because when someone tells you, it's like, yeah, it sounds good. But then when you see it happen for your own with your own money, that's kind of when the reality sets in for you. So
Mhm.
I'd say that.
Okay. All right. So what's a money lesson that you wish everyone learned early in life?
Mm. Just budgeting, right?
Budgeting. Okay.
That's we're in a society where consumerism is, the thing, and it's kind of hard to dampen that or, prevent that from happening or learn how to save sometimes if you don't learn about the power of saving. So, yeah.
Okay. And so I think today investing is accessible to us all. There's no, there's no barrier. There's fractional shares. There's, brokers like Fidelity that don't have any high limitations. You need to have $2,500 or, there's really no barrier to getting started with investing. So what advice would you give someone that's just getting started out and still feeling intimidated?
Jump into the deep end. um, no, no, but really, I think
Just
just getting
just
just
go and invest into the S&P and that'll be your
yeah,
start?
I think like anything, you want to invest in something that doesn't seem reckless. And even if you invest in something that's super conservative, that just to get started, that's enough again to kind of help the realization set in once you start adding to it, you start to see it grow. I think just getting started because sitting on the sidelines won't help. And then again, you have what's going on in the environment. If there's bad news out there, it's just gonna double down on your feelings about questioning and adding to your doubts of getting whether to get started or not.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I had enjoyed our conversation today. I hope you did also. This has
Yeah,
been a long time coming. The community, I think Sledge said it at the beginning of the show that he has been saying this for over a year now. Let me see if I can go back to the top and see if I can find Sledge's comment. But it's been a long time. Here it is right here. Sledge says, I've been pressing these two to work together for a year, for over a year, finally. So I hope this is not the last time. I hope that me, you, Sledge, the entire community continue to stay involved, support each other, and do things that bring all this great knowledge uh, to the community regarding credit cards, investing, which is what I love. And I'm glad that we finally made some time to have this happen. So Are you going to be incorporating, I know you've touched on incorporating, more about your portfolio, individual stocks, stock market news, but are you going to be incorporating any live streams when it comes to your channel?
Yeah. I think at some point, I don't know when. I'm still working on my setup. Like you saw the stuff about the microphones. The last live I did, I didn't realize how bad my earbud microphones were. So I was like, all right, let me try out this different microphone. So I'm slowly gonna work on getting the setup better. Too, like with the streaming software. So at some point, yeah, I'd like to
Okay.
add it in there.
Well, we'll be looking out for that. I always enjoy your videos, and I always, every time I feel like I comment, I want to comment on the content of the video as well as the editing of the video. I know you've heard it from me many times before, but I always enjoy your content, and I think it's great. And any closing words for us today?
Yeah. Well, first, I really appreciate you having me on. Definitely, do something again in the future. Definitely look forward to that. As far as everybody else, appreciate any of the comments. I know there's a few questions in there. Probably missed a few, but appreciate everybody watching. Stay invested. There's a lot of noise going on in the market right now. Don't let it get to you. Just focus. Continue dollar cost averaging. Don't let the news get to you. Like I said, market's been going on for decades and decades. It's still here, and hopefully doesn't go anywhere anytime soon, which I don't think it will. So just stay motivated, keep on investing, and you know you'll come out on top.
Okay. Okay. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for chatting. Please leave some comments and questions even after the live stream has ended. Tomorrow, or as soon as I can, I will add chapters to this live stream. So if you got in late, hopefully you can jump in and pick up. And of course, if you haven't already, give the live a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to Darius' channel, check out his content. He gives very detailed knowledge on very detailed breakdowns on ETFs that you can incorporate in building your portfolio. And I enjoy his content. I think it's important for us all to tune in and be a part of networks that and communities that we are trying to build like this to help you on your journey in order to invest and build wealth in a strategic way in order to maximize our money. So I'm going to wrap it up for today. Again, I want to say thank you for everyone that tuned in. Thank you to my mods. Thank you to all the supporters. Thank you to Vincent for giving that super chat earlier in the show. And I will be back next Sunday as usual. Have that notification bell on to keep up with my videos and live streams. Do the same over on Darius' channel. Put that notification bell on so that you can check out his latest videos. And we'll be back soon. Have a good rest of your week.